Continuing the curious book. All is invigorated by the animating sunbeams which awaken the heart to songs of gaiety, leaving this point to notice another prominent consideration, which is generally one of great moment and of vital importance. Invariably she is firm and steady in all her pursuits and aims. There is required a combination of forces and extreme opposition to drive her from her position. She takes her stand not to be moved by the sound of Apollo's lyre or the curved bow of pleasure, firm and true to what she undertakes, and that which she requires by her own aggrandizement, and regards as being within the strict rules of propriety. She will remain stable and unflinching to the last. A more genuine principle is not to be found in the most determined, resolute heart of man. For this she deserves to be held in the highest commendation. For this she deserves the purest of all other blessings, and for this she deserves the most laudable reward of all others. It is a notable characteristic, and is worthy of the imitation of any age. And when we look at it in one particular aspect, it is still magnified and grows brighter and brighter the more we reflect upon its eternal duration. What will she not do when her word as well as her affections and love are pledged to her lover? Everything that is dear to her on earth, all the hospitalities of kind and loving parents, all the sincerity and lovingness of sisters, and the benevolent devotion of brothers, who have surrounded her with every comfort, she will forsake them all, quit the harmony and sweet sound of the lute and the harp, and throw herself upon the affections of some devoted admirer, in whom she fondly hopes to find more than she has left behind, which is not often realized by many. Truth and virtue all combined, how deserving our admiration and love! How cruel would it be in man, after she has thus manifested such an unshaken confidence in him, and said by her determination to abandon all endearments and blandishments of home, to act a villainous part, and prove a traitor in the revolution of his mission, and then turn Hector over, the innocent victim, whom he swore to protect in the presence of heaven, recorded by the pen of an angel. Striking as this trait may unfold itself in her character, and as preeminent as it may stand among the fair display of her other qualities, yet there is another which struggles into existence and adds an additional luster to what she already possesses. I mean, that disposition in woman which enables her in sorrow, in grief, and in distress to bear all with enduring patience. This she has done, and can and will do, amid the din of war and clash of arms, scenes and occurrences which, to every appearance, are calculated to rend the heart with the profoundest emotions of trouble. Do not fet her the exalted principle imbued in her very nature. It is true her tender and feeling heart may often be moved, as she is thus constituted, but she is not conquered. She has not given up to the harlequin of disappointments. Her energies have not become clouded in the last moment of misfortune, but she is continually invigorated by the archetype of her affections. She may bury her face in her hands, and let the tear of anguish roll. She may promenade the delightful walks of some garden decorated with all the flowers of nature, or she may steal out among some gently rippling stream, and there, as the silver waters uninterruptedly move forward, shed her silent tears. They mingle with the waves, and take a last farewell of their agitated home to seek a peaceful dwelling among the rolling floods. Yet there is a voice rushing from her breast that proclaims victory along the whole line and battlement of her affections. That voice is the voice of patience and resignation. That voice is one that bears everything calmly and dispassionately. Amid the most distressing scenes, when the fates are arrayed against her peace, and apparently plotting for her destruction, she still is resigned. Woman's affections are deep. Consequently, her troubles may be made to sink deep. Although you may not be able to mark the traces of her grief and the furrowings of her anguish upon her winning countenance, yet be assured they are nevertheless preying upon her inward person, sapping the very foundation of that heart which alone was made for the weal and not the woe of man. The deep recesses of the soul are fields for their operation. But they are not destined simply to take the regions of the heart for their dominion. They are not satisfied merely with interrupting her better feelings, but after a while you may see the blooming cheek beginning to droop and fade. Her intelligent eye no longer sparkles with the starry light of heaven. Her vibrating pulse, long since changed its regular motion, and her palpitating bosom beats once more for the midday of her glory. Anxiety and care ultimately throw her into the arms of the haggard and grim monster Death. And death of different sorts, right? But oh, how patient! Under every pining influence, let us view the matter in bolder colors. See her when the dearest object of her affections recklessly seeks every bacchanalian pleasure, contents himself with the last rubbish of creation. With what solicitude she awaits his return. Sleep fails to perform its office. She weeps while the nocturnal shades of the night triumph in the stillness, bending over some favorite book whilst the author throws before her mind the most beautiful imagery. She startles at every sound. The midday silence is broken by the solemn announcement of the return of another morning. She is still absent. She listens for that voice which has so often been greeted by the melodies of her own, but alas, stern silence is all that she receives for her vigilance. Mark her unwearied watchfulness. As the night passes away, at last, brutalized by the accursed thing, he staggers along with rage, and shivering with cold, he makes his appearance. Not a murmur is heard from her lips. On the contrary, she meets him with a smile. She caresses him with her tender arms, with all the gentleness and softness of her sex. Here, then, is seen her disposition, beautifully arrayed. Woman, thou art more to be admired than the spicy gales of Arabia, and more sought for than the gold of Golconda. We believe that woman should associate freely with man, and we believe that it is for the preservation of her rights she should become acquainted with the metaphysical designs of those who condescend to sing the siren song of flattery. This, we think, should be according to the unwritten law of decorum, which is stamped upon every innocent heart. The precepts of prudery are often steeped in the guilt of contamination, which blasts the expectations of better moments. Now, guilt and shame and fear and stuff is supposed to drive you towards a better living of life, not, away from life. Truth and beautiful dreams, loveliness and delicacy of character, with cherished affections of the ideal woman, gentle hopes and aspirations are enough to uphold her in the storms of darkness, without the transferred colorings of a stained cipher. How often have we seen it in our public prints? That woman occupies a false station in the world, and some have gone so far as to say it was an unnatural one. Now, in the Christian Trinity, instead of a quadrinity, what's excluded? The negative, the female, whatever. So, in not dealing with that, we create a female demon, much like the Nine Gates movie. Certainly there can be evil women that are blonde-haired and green-eyed, but, those outer signs don't tell you that the person's an evil woman. And some have gone so far to say it was an unnatural one. So long has she been regarded a weak creature by the rabble and illiterate, and they have looked upon her as an insufficient actress on the great stage of human life, a mere puppet to fill up the drama of human existence, a thoughtless and active being, that she has too often come to the same conclusion herself, and has sometimes forgotten her high destination in the meridian of her glory. The different genders have their own strengths and weaknesses. They're equal overall, but if we're always judging by the strengths of one gender, that they tend to have, it's going to create some issues. Western society is plagued by those very same issues, calling for sameness rather than equality. We have but little sympathy or patience for those who treat her as a mere rosy Melindy, who are always fishing for pretty compliments, who are satisfied by the gossamer of romance, and who can be allured by the verbosity of high-flown words, rich in language, but poor and barren in sentiment, beset as she has been by the intellectual vulgar, the selfish, the designing, the cunning, the hidden, and the artful. No wonder she has sometimes folded her wings in despair and forgotten her heavenly mission in the delirium of imagination. No wonder she searches out some wild desert to find a peaceful home. But this cannot always continue. A new era is moving gently onward. Old things are rapidly passing away. Old superstitions, old prejudices, old notions are now bidding farewell to their old associates and companions, and giving way to one whose wings are plumbed with the light of heaven and tinged by the dews of the morning. There is a remnant of blessedness that clings to her in spite of all evil influence. There is enough of the divine master left to accomplish the noblest work ever achieved under the canopy of the vaulted skies, and that time is fast approaching when the picture of the true woman will shine from its frame of glory, to captivate, to win back, to restore, and call into being once more the object of her mission. Star the brave, thy glory shed o'er all the earth, thy army led, bold meteor of immortal birth, why come from heaven to dwell on earth? Mighty and glorious are the days of youth, happy the moments of the lover, mingled with smiles and tears of his devoted, and long to be remembered are the achievements which he gains with a palpitating heart and trembling hand. A bright and lovely dawn, the harbinger of a fair and prosperous day, had arisen over the beautiful little village of Cumming, which is surrounded by the most romantic scenery in the Cherokee country. Brightening clouds seemed to rise from the midst of the fair Chattahoochee, to spread their beauty over the thick forest, to guide the hero whose bosom beats with aspirations to conquer the enemy that would tarnish his name, and to win back the admiration of his long-tried friend. He endeavored to make his way through Shawnee's Mountain, where many meet to catch the gales that are continually blowing for the refreshment of the stranger and the traveler. Surrounded as he was by hills on every side, naked rocks dared the efforts of his energies. Soon the sky became overcast, the sun buried itself in the clouds, and the fair day gave place to the gloomy twilight, which lay heavily on the Indian plains. He remembered an old Indian castle that once stood at the foot of the mountain. He thought if he could make his way to this, he would rest contented for a short time. The mountain air breathed fragrance, a rosy tinge rested on the glassy waters that murmured at its base. His resolution soon brought him to the remains of the Red Man's hut. He surveyed with wonder and astonishment the decayed building which time had buried in the dust, and thought to himself, his happiness was not yet complete. Beside the shore of the brook sat a young man about 18 or 20, who seemed to be reading some favorite book, and who had a remarkably noble countenance, eyes which betrayed more than a common mind. This, of course, made the youth a welcome guest, and gained him friends in whatever condition of life he might be placed. The traveler observed that he was a well-built figure, which showed strength and grace in every movement. He accordingly addressed him in quite a gentlemanly manner, and inquired of him the way to the village. After he had received the desired information, and was about taking his leave, the youth said, "Are you not Major Alfonso, the great musician, the champion of a noble cause, the modern Achilles, who gained so many victories in the Florida War?" "I bear that name," said the major, "and those titles, trusting at the same time that the ministers of grace will carry me triumphantly through all my laudable undertakings. And if," continued the major, "you, sir, are the patronizer of noble deeds, I should like to make you my confidant and learn your address." The youth looked somewhat amazed, bowed low, mused for a moment, and began, "My name is Roswell. I've been recently admitted to the bar, and can only give a faint outline of my future success in that honorable profession. But I trust, sir, like the eagle, I shall look down from lofty rocks upon the dwellings of man, and shall ever be ready to give you any assistance in my official capacity. And whatever this muscular arm of mine can do, whenever it shall be called from its buried greatness, the Major grasped him by the hand and exclaimed, "Oh, thou exalted spirit of inspiration, thou flame of burning prosperity, may the heaven-directed blaze be the glare of thy soul and battle down every rampart that seems to impede your progress." The road which led to the town presented many attractions. Alfonso had bid farewell to the youth of deep feeling and was now wending his way to the dreaming spot of his fondness. The south winds whistled through the woods as the waters dashed against the banks, as rapid fire in the pent furnace roars. This brought him to remember, while alone, that he quietly left behind the hospitality of a father's house and gladly entered the world with higher hopes than are often realized. But as he journeyed onward, he was mindful of the advice of his father, who had often looked sadly on the ground when tears of cruelly deceived hope moistened his eye. Alfonso had been somewhat of a dutiful son, yet fond of the amazements of life, and had been in distant lands, had enjoyed the pleasure of the world, and had frequently returned to the scenes of his boyhood almost destitute of many of the comforts of life. In this condition, he would frequently say to his father, "Have I offended you, that you look upon me as a stranger, and frown upon me with stinging looks? Will you not favor me with the sound of your voice? If I have trampled upon your veneration, or have spread a humid veil of darkness around your expectations, send me back into the world, where no heart beats for me, where the foot of man has never yet trod, but give me at least one kind word. Allow me to come into the presence sometimes of thy winter-worn locks. Forbid it, heaven, that I should be angry with thee." Answered the father, "My son, and yet I send thee back to the children of the world, to the cold charity of the combat, and to a land of victory. I read another destiny in thy countenance. I learn thy inclinations from the flame that is already kindled in my soul, a strange sensation. It will seek thee, my dear Alfonso. It will find thee. Thou canst not escape that lighted torch which shall blot out from the remembrance of man a long train of prophecies which they have foretold against thee. I once thought not so. Once I was blind, but now the path of life is plain before me, and my sight is clear. Yet, Alfonso, return to thy worldly occupation. Take again in thy hand that chord of sweet sounds, struggle with this civilized world, and with your own heart fly swiftly to the enchanted ground. Let the night owl send forth its screams from the stubborn oak. Let the sea sport upon the beach, and the stars sing together. But learn of these, Alfonso, thy doom and thy hiding place. Our most innocent as well as our most lawful desires must often be denied us, that we may learn to sacrifice them to a higher will." Remembering such admonitions with gratitude, Alfonso was immediately urged by the recollection of his father's family to keep moving. His steps became quicker and quicker. He hastened through the piney woods, dark as the forest was, and with joy he very soon reached the little village of repose, in whose bosom rested the boldest chivalry. His close attention to every important object, his modest questions about whatever was new to him, his reverence for wise old age, and his ardent desire to learn many of the fine arts, soon brought him into respectable notice. One mild winter day, as he walked along the streets toward the academy, which stood upon a small eminence, surrounded by their native growth, some venerable in its appearance, others young and prosperous, all seemed inviting, and seemed to be the very place for learning as well as for genius, to spend its research beneath its spreading shades. He entered its classic walls in the usual mode of Southern manners. The principal of the institution begged him to be seated and listen to the recitations that were going on. He accordingly obeyed the request, and seemed to be much pleased. After the school was dismissed and the young hearts regained their freedom with the songs of the evening, laughing at the anticipated pleasures of a happy home, while others tittered at the actions of the past day, he addressed the teacher in a tone that indicated a resolution. With an undaunted mind, he said that he had determined to become a student, if he could meet with his approbation. "Sir," said he, "I have spent much time in the world. I have traveled among the uncivilized inhabitants of America. I've met with friends and combated with foes, but none of these gratify my ambition or decide what is to be my destiny. I see the learned world have an influence with the voice of the people themselves, the despoilers of the remotest kingdoms of the earth offer their differences to this class of persons. This the illiterate and inexperienced little dream of. And now, if you will receive me as I am with these deficiencies, with all my misguided opinions, I will give you my honor, sir, that I will never disgrace the institution or those that have placed you in this honorable station. The instructor had met with many disappointments, knew how to feel a stranger who had been thus turned up upon the charities of an unfeeling community. He looked at him earnestly and said, "Be of good cheer. Look forward, sir, to the high destination you may attain. Remember the more elevated mark at which you aim. The more sure, the more glorious, the more magnificent the prize." From wonder to wonder, his encouragement led. The impatient listener, a strange nature, bloomed before him. Giant streams promised him success. Gardens of hidden treasure opened to his view. All this so vividly described seemed to gain a new witchery from his glowing fancy. In 1842, he entered the class and made rapid progress. In the English and Latin departments. Indeed, he continued advancing with such rapidity that he was like to become first in his class, and made such unexpected progress, and was so studious that he had almost forgotten the pictured saint of his affections. The fresh wreaths of the pine and cypress had waited anxiously to drop once more the dews of heaven upon the heads of those who so often poured forth their tender emotions of their souls under its boughs. He was aware of the pleasure that he had seen there. And so one evening, as he was returning from his reading, he concluded that he would pay a visit to this enchanting spot. Little did he